Hey, what's up guys, this is Serb, and today I'm going to be sharing with you guys the absolute best way to solo farm in patch 1.5. I know that a lot of you guys are going to be solo players, and since I've made a couple solo builds in the past, I thought that it would make sense for me to make a video accommodating you solo players, just showing you guys the absolute best way for you to farm patch 1.5 in terms of loot per hour, and just getting as much gear as possible so you can gear up. And before I get into it, I just want to mention that if anybody is interested, I am still offering a farming service where I can just get on your account and farm for you, so if you're too busy with the holidays or work or school or whatever the case may be, feel free to email me at DisturbedMods@gmail.com. I'd be more than happy to help you out build that amazing PvP or PvE build so you can just shred NPCs or players. But if you're not interested, then that's exactly what this video is for. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So starting off, similar to how I prefaced my previous farming video, I'm just going to discount a few of the other farming methods that are in the game prior to explaining what the best methods are for solo farming at least, because this will provide you with more insight as to why the method that I'm going to use is going to be more prevalent than the other farms. If you're not interested in hearing all this, like some of you weren't in my previous farming video, feel free to just skip a couple minutes ahead in the video. But I do think that it's important that you have an understanding as to why one method is going to be better than the other, but it is what it is. If you want to skip ahead, just feel free to. So starting off with some of the methods that I'm going to discount is the dark zone. As a solo player, you can't really farm the dark zone because it's extremely risky. I mean, you can, I've done it before and I've been fine, but it can be really risky as you risk dying to NPCs due to the mob density being extremely high and then just getting swarmed by them and them doing a pretty decent amount of damage because it's built for having about 4 people there. And you also risk dying to players when calling in an extraction or just random rogues running around the map. So if you plan on solo farming, I'd highly suggest just taking the dark zone off your list. Another way you can farm patch 1.5 is by doing the survival game mode. It gives you like an okay amount of loot upon completion, but the problem with it is that not everybody has access to it right now, with PS4 just straight up not having it yet and some people not even owning the DLC. So I'm just not even going to really be mentioning it. And also, when playing survival, there's a huge risk of dying towards the end, and if you die, you pretty much just wasted an entire hour of your time. So for the sake of the video, I'm just not going to be mentioning survival. Next, we have incursions, which is again pretty obvious, but it's extremely difficult to do solo incursions, and even if you can manage to do it, it's just simply not time effective like the other farms would be, so that's another one right off the list. And lastly, I'm just going to quickly talk about HVTs, which are still really great farms, don't get me wrong, but the only problem is that you have to farm the target intel, and since you're going to be solo, you have to do that all by yourself, which takes a hell of a lot of time to farm up, and it's also really boring to farm for the target intel. And when it comes to finding the best farming method, all that I'm looking for is loot per hour, and if you're spending a lot of time getting that target intel, then HVTs become very time consuming and therefore not the best in terms of bang for your buck for your hour. So yeah, I'm just going to take HVTs right off the list. They're also rather risky whilst playing solo, so I wouldn't recommend doing them at all. So with those 3 out of the way, that narrows it down to 3 farms left, all of which are good in their own respects. So first off, we have Lexington Event Center, where you can solo it on challenging mode rather easily. Usually one run will only take you about 7 to 10 minutes depending upon how good your build is. Please keep in mind though, when I am referencing times, I am usually going to be taking into account how long it takes me to do it. So when I say that Lexington will take me about 8 minutes, that's for me. I know that a lot of you are going to have builds that aren't as good as mine, because I have this crazy build where I can pop my ult all the time. If you want to see that, a link will be in the description. But I know that a lot of you aren't going to have as good of a build that I have. But when I compare all the farms in a minute here, you can see that I am kind of averaging out the time, so just keep that in mind. But going back to Lexington, for me, I average around 8.5 minutes to do one entire run, and upon completion you get 3 pieces of loot from the boss, 2 pieces from the mission reward, and 80 Phoenix credits every time you complete a full run. This farm is absolutely amazing, but I'll delve into it more when comparing it to the other 2 farms. The next one that I'm going to talk about that's great when playing solo is the underground. I'm able to do one phase mission in around 5 to 7 minutes depending upon which one it is, and upon completion I get 4 pieces of loot from the boss and 1 piece of loot from the box at the end. So in total that's going to be 5 pieces of loot, but that's not going to be counting NPC drops, the boxes throughout the mission, etc. And then the third method that's really good when playing solo is farming all the named bosses in the open world, which will take around 25 to 35 minutes to finish. And after killing all those bosses, you should get around 30 pieces of loot because there are 15 bosses and each is going to drop 2 pieces of gear, and around 90 Phoenix credits because each boss will drop around 5 to 7 pieces. So when comparing all of these farms, we can see that in terms of bang for your buck, the underground is going to give you more gear per hour than any of the other farms would be giving us, and this is simply due to the fact that you can run underground extremely fast while playing solo, and the boss is going to drop a lot of loot. So theoretically speaking, if all you cared about was just straight up loot per hour and you like running the underground, then that would probably be your best bet. But personally, I'm not that big a fan of the underground, and just because the underground gives more loot doesn't necessarily make it the best farm, because every person is different and might want to farm for different things, such as Phoenix credits or something else. So let's just take a look at a list of pros and cons for each of the farming methods, and then you yourself can decide as to what farm you'd rather do. So first off, looking at the underground, the only pro that I could think of for the underground is the fact that you get more loot per hour than any of the other farms. But in the cons section, it gives you less Phoenix credits than the other methods. It can be pretty damn annoying at times with having on the directives and the way that the NPCs spawn and whatnot. And also, if you die, you have to restart from the beginning, and you I mean, if you die, you pretty much just wasted all your time, and so that kind of sucked. And it's also going to be harder than farming Lexington or the world bosses. So that's it for the underground. Moving on to Lexington, the pros are that you have the chance of getting the Barrett's chest piece, which is probably the best high end in the entire game. Absolutely amazing. Does have a rare drop rate, but I mean, hey, that's at least a plus. And it's also a rather relaxing farm that isn't extremely difficult. You get over double the amount of Phoenix credits farming Lexington than you would with any other underground or the world bosses. So if you need Phoenix credits, then Lexington is definitely the way to go. But in terms of cons, you get less pieces of loot per hour than the underground, like mentioned before, and it can end up getting really boring running the exact same thing over and over again. But again, it's just up to personal preference. And lastly, we have the random world bosses, and in the pros column, we have the fact that it's incredibly easy to run solo. Most of the NPCs are going to be reds, and there's just one boss. So if you're brand new to 1.5 and you just need to gear up super quickly, I definitely recommend running around and farming the world bosses, and that will give you a good head start, as it does give a pretty decent amount of loot. But in the cons, we can see that you can only do this or farm every 4 hours. So unless you have multiple characters with all the side missions done at every safe house, by the way, keep in mind you have to do all the missions at every safe house for you to unlock all the bosses, then you have to wait a few hours in between when farming this. And another thing is that you barely get any Phoenix credits because you're only getting the drops from the bosses, which you would still be getting from Lexington and the underground on top of the mission rewards from both of those places. So if you need Phoenix credits, then the world bosses is definitely not the way to go, but it is just a good way to head start yourself if you have like 229 gear score and you just want to get to 256 real quick. That's a really good way to start. So yeah, guys, take all that information in and decide on your own what would be the best farm for you. For me personally, I absolutely hate the farming the underground, even though it does give you a lot of loot, and if you were to do it per hour, you'd probably get upwards of 70 pieces of loot per hour. But I like to reroll guns a ton, so I'm probably just going to be farming Lexington mostly because I actually enjoy farming that, and like I said, I don't really like the underground. But if all you want is like a bunch of loot, then feel free to farm the underground, or maybe if you don't have a lot of time to play every day and you just want to farm something that's extremely easy and worry-free, the random world bosses is a great choice as well. But with me farming Lexington, I'm going to be able to get around 560 Phoenix credits per hour and about 50 pieces of loot per hour, counting the boss drops, the mission rewards, the random NPC drops throughout the missions, and the field proficiency caches, so that's really great. Of course, farming solo isn't going to be near as good as farming with a whole group and doing clear skies. That can get you upwards of 100 pieces of loot per hour, but it's still a really decent amount, like 50 to 70 pieces of loot depending upon what farm you're doing, but it's still a really good amount if you're playing solo. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. If this video helped you out or you did enjoy, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe for videos similar to this one. I'll see you later, guys.